There's a lot of information out there in the world, and those who know how to use it wield unspeakable power. With the advent of the internet and globalization, we now have easier access to this wealth of information than any civilization that ever came before us. Indeed, we can now call ourselves modern-day emperors of our own individual worlds, able to find any info we could possibly need at the press of a button. This being the case, there are still those that seek to withhold and censor certain information, keeping it from the public in an attempt to maintain an advantage, perceived or otherwise. This process of censorship leaves individual citizens clamoring for the truth, but is slowly losing its footing. We must state that we're not advocating any kind of revolution or rebellion here, but we do think that it's important to bring these important details to your attention, if only for the sake of public interest. We've collected our top 5 things you're not supposed to know to help shed some light on the topic. Let's begin. Number 5. America's war on drugs was a racist excuse to continue a war. Okay, so we probably all know about this, but the fact remains that from the government's point of view, we really shouldn't. Politicians showing their hand and public servants spilling the beans has really brought to light how appallingly ridiculous the entire issue is. We don't think that drugs are good, but the fact is that the so-called war on them is actually causing more harm than good. To make matters even worse, the concept was based purely on racism and warmongering, which isn't something to be proud of. Nixon, facing increasing pressure from the anti-war movement, decided to take out 2 political enemies with one stone. One was the anti-war movement, known for its laid-back attitudes towards drugs and free love. The other was Black Americans. Unfortunately for Nixon, one of his top aides later admitted this openly and publicly, sparking a ton of backlash. Not only did the US government purposefully mislead the public with a wildly exaggerated and vicious propaganda campaign, but the president himself was behind the move with all of his misguided rage. The fact that we now know the reasons behind the war on drugs and the fact that it's failing makes it even more surprising that it's still being waged. We also now know that the CIA, with full support of the government, was instrumental in introducing crack to American inner cities in a vile attempt to discredit the black population. All of this was conducted in the name of power and highlights the corruption rampant in the US government. That they're willing to throw so many of their citizens under the bus by imposing ludicrously stiff minimum penalties for minor offenses, with many drug users spending more time incarcerated than murderers, shows how little the government cares about its citizens. It's also a big mistake that this information was even made public. Still, we're happy that it was brought to our attention at all, if only due to political incompetence. Number 4. What happens in restaurant kitchens? For those who've worked in the food service industry at some point, this'll just be business as usual. For everyone else, however, you're in for a rude awakening. It's always somewhat amusing when someone finds a hair in their food or a fly in their soup, then begin complaining to their server about the terrible inconvenience. Now, there's nothing funny in the situation up until the point where the server looks down and, terribly surprised and concerned about your health and safety, offers to redo your dish. You probably think we're leading up to the worst part being the point where the head chef picks the hair out and sends it straight back with an extra dash of condescension. That's actually the best part. At least no hairs in your food anymore, no problem there. What we're alluding to is the fact that every surface in that kitchen is most likely absolutely filthy. The floor in all kitchens, no matter how often or carefully the staff seems to clean up, is covered in a layer of grease that will seemingly never wash out. Kitchen staff are constantly slicing fingers and burning themselves on hot surfaces. Blisters, gashes, blood, and sweat are all staples of kitchen life, and they all add to the environment that your food is prepared in. Furthermore, it's hard to monitor hand washing, and this is the ultimate issue. Chances are good that most of the staff in any restaurant that you dine in don't care as much about your food's cleanliness as you do. Most are too busy, at least in their mind, to take the time to wash up. Either that or they're potentially too hungover to care. If your steak hits the floor on the way to the table and nobody else sees it, how much are you willing to wager that the kid bringing it out to you decided to fess up and tell the cooks they have to cook another, pronto, then tell you that you're gonna have to wait? Number 3. The Anarchist's Cookbook Recipes. This throwback doesn't contain just one item that we're not supposed to know. It's, well, an entire cookbook full of nasty recipes that cover all manner of illicit activities and creations. Mostly forgotten these days, except for a handful of ne'er-do-wells, it was known for a time as the Hackers and Mischief Makers Bible. From credit card fraud to making homemade thermite, this book contains everything that your parents and the government never wanted you to know. The cookbook is somewhat dated, as evidenced by a large section dedicated to phone phreaking, which basically covers how to hack payphones and other devices no longer in popular use. Many of the hacking methods outlined by the cookbook are outdated and pose no real threat in today's world. The bomb-making sections, among a number of others, are still an issue in the wrong hands, and there's some dark stuff in there that we won't even begin to touch on. That being said, most of these recipes are now being replaced by much larger scale operations. This list will not help you become a fully fledged guerrilla freedom fighter, but they will make you the bane of your neighborhood. Almost everything that it contains will also get you in serious trouble. Much of the methods, chemicals, and materials covered are extremely dangerous and highly illegal. We do not recommend anyone actually attempt to build any of the recipes contained, as most will leave you permanently injured or dead if anything goes wrong. It comes as no surprise then that the Anarchist's Cookbook makes our list. Number 2. Building a nuke. While this one is a little more complicated to pull off, this item should be noted by governments everywhere. Nowadays, even individuals can build their own nuke given enough time and the right specs. The good news here is that it's pretty difficult to get those specs in the first place, and the materials needed are extremely rare. A lot of them are also restricted and very hard to find no matter what connections you have. Unfortunately, this hasn't stopped a number of enterprising groups from building and testing their own nuclear devices. That is terrifying to think about, but might take a little while to sink in, so we'll clarify it a little further. People can potentially build their own nukes in their backyard if they're dedicated enough. With all the energy released by one nuke, it's unnerving to find out that they're so easy to get a hold of today. To put this in context, let's take you back to 1995, when a group by the name of Aum Shinrikyo launched a sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway system. The attack itself was world news, but many outlets missed the group's connection to a seismic event that took place in the Australian outback 2 years earlier. It turns out that the group had bought a piece of land located in the middle of the Australian desert at a place called Banjawarn Station. The landowner gave them privacy and didn't think to check in on them very often. He probably should have done so because the mysterious and unexplainable seismic event, completely ignored for so long by authorities, was actually the after effects of the group setting off a massive nuclear device. What's most disturbing is that until the group was investigated following the Tokyo attacks, nobody had even suspected that the massive explosion could have possibly been a nuke. At least 2 full years passed between when they detonated the bomb and when the authorities figured it out. They were also known to have recruited Soviet nuclear engineers. When we take that into consideration, plus the fact that they were also happily mining uranium in the area without any suspicions being aroused, the world becomes a much scarier place. Number 1. Mururoa Atoll. Also known as Alpini, this tiny island is located in French Polynesia. While the use of the island as a nuclear testing ground for the French military is widely known and universally unpopular outside France, the island has supposedly not been used for that purpose since the late 90s. Testing on the atoll, as far as nukes have been concerned, has also been an issue of international contention. The first test took place in '66, and the accounts are something out of the nightmares of all Greenpeace and PETA members combined. The blast was sufficiently powerful to pull all the water out of the lagoon, spraying it into the sky. Seconds later, eyewitnesses report fish and all manner of sea creatures raining from the sky, thoroughly cooked and irradiated. No account was given as to the reaction of any cats or dogs present, to which preference is traditionally given when it comes to imaginative descriptions of heavy rain, but we can probably safely say that they were happy to not be involved with bombs of any size. What's puzzling these days is that the island is still actively blurred out by Google Maps. Not many places in the world hold this distinction, but most that do are sites of the utmost secrecy. This begs the question why. If France is no longer conducting nuclear tests in that area, are these images deemed so top secret? After the government announced in '95 that it would recommence tests, the response was uniformly negative. The boycott even included an international embargo of French wine, which must have stung terribly. Whatever they're doing, they definitely don't want a repeat of that type of backlash, and so are probably wisely keeping quiet. It's generally accepted that further bomb tests would draw far too much attention, but many assume they're up to something worth looking into. Also interesting to note, a report that came out only a few years ago found that many of the island's monitoring systems, more than half in fact, have been disabled and are no longer in operation. Is it just us, or is that an odd thing to miss during general inspections and maintenance, especially after going well out of their way to hide the images from Google Maps? And there, you have 5 things you are not supposed to know. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like and share it, and if you haven't already, subscribe down below to get notified almost every single day with new videos from Top 5's finest. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, we are